in Europe. The regulation 1223 of 2009. So LISM South Africa was commissioned by GIZ ABioSA to present or to develop knowledge products and data related to the safety of cosmetics and cosmetic raw materials to assist the South African oil producers and users to ensure compliance with cosmetic regulation, with the aim of reducing trade barriers in the EU. Today, my presentation will cover the following topics. I'll just give you a small background again to who LISM is, what we do, the background to the project, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the product information file, which is in accordance with the cosmetic regulation. What are the actual regulatory requirements? I can't obviously go into all of it at this stage, but I've tried to touch on the most important points, that being the definitions, some of the definitions contained in the regulation. What is the responsible person? What is the responsible person's legal requirements? I thought we'll touch on labeling of cosmetic products, because we often get a lot of questions around this topic. And then what actually goes into a product information file, and why do we need this information? All of the information that is required in a product information file is under the cosmetic product regulation and is regulated. So all this information is required. And then I will take you through a safety assessment process very briefly to understand why we're asking for all the information we do ask for in terms of an oil or a chemical product. And then lastly, we'll just show you how to register on the cosmetic product notification portal in the EU, and what the requirements are there. Okay, so LISM was founded in 1999, so more than 20 years ago. We're a global provider of environmental health and safety compliance management software, which is our core business. And we also provide services in certain countries to support our clients in terms of their regulatory requirements. We have 18 offices globally, and we also have a local support team in each country. In South Africa, we have our team, and we specialize in both the software side and also supporting our clients from a regulatory point of view. These regulatory support functions involve REACH registration, REACH-only representative services, volume tracking if you're an OR, EU poison center notification, legal entity setup, EU regulatory assessments, not only EU, any of the countries that we reside in. We can do regulatory assessments for those countries. And then our particular strength in South Africa is to support companies that want to export to the EU from a cosmetics point of view. We have a specialist service that focuses on safety assessments and responsible person services. So just to give you a background to our project with ABioSA, we were looking at indigenous ingredients, vegetable oils, and essential oils, and I'll go through the list in the next slide. And we looked at 3 particular regulatory requirements. That of Regulation 1907/2006, which is REACH, known as REACH, and then the Regulation 1272 of 2008, which is known as CLP in Europe. Each country has their own regulation for the global harmonized system, and CLP is that in Europe. South Africa has sent out a notification where our GHS will be implemented under the OSH Act by September next year. So a similar regulation, but each country or region has its own regulatory requirements under that. And that's where you find the requirements for your safety data sheet. REACH is where you find the requirements for registering a chemical in Europe and the requirements under that. Today, I'm going to be focusing on the Cosmetic Products Regulation 1223 of 2009, and we'll try and cover the main points in that regulation and try to make it a bit more easy to understand how everything fits together and how why we need the information on a chemical to fit into this regulation here for a final cosmetic product. Okay, so the project was to provide small and medium-sized enterprises and Indigenous peoples and local communities with technical assistance to ensure technical assistance from a regulatory point of view to ensure greater sector compliance with the EU in terms of the three regulations that I've mentioned in the previous slide: REACH, CLP, and cosmetics. And where possible, novel foods if the question came up, but it wasn't a primary focus of the project. The oils that we focused on were 6 vegetable oils and 5 essential oils: marula, baobab, mongongo, kalahari melon, sour plum, and mafura oil and butter in the vegetable oil section. And then for the essential oils, lipia, rose geranium, helichrysum, buchu, and Cape chamomile. Sorry, I'm just trying to change to the next slide. As mentioned, today I'm covering the product information file and the details required to complete it. So we've mentioned this a few times already. The regulation for cosmetic products is EC 1223/2009. It requires a product information file for all cosmetic finished products made available in the European Community market. This is the regulation. You can go refer to it. It's available on the European Community website. So I thought I'll touch on the definition of a cosmetic product under the regulation. This is a key point to understand because it can answer a lot of the questions that you may have, whether your product is a cosmetic or not, and whether the regulation applies to you. So cosmetic product definition is any substance or mixture intended to be placed in contact with the external parts of the human body, which are defined as the epidermis, the hair system, nails, lips, and external genital organs, or with the teeth or mucous membranes of the oral cavity. So for example, toothpaste. With the view of exclusively or mainly, and you must remember this, so the function of a cosmetic is mainly to clean, perfume, change appearance, protect, or keep these external parts in good condition, or to correct body odors. So that's the actual definition in the regulation. The key aspects of this definition to take cognizance of is the application site and the principal intended function. So a product may have a principal purpose and a secondary purpose. So this may not exclude it from being a cosmetic product, but it may mean that another regulation also applies. So example, toothpaste keeps teeth clean and healthy, but is not a medicinal product if the product is not presented as such. The product may also be a medicinal product, a medical device, which could be your secondary purpose, a biocide, a toy, a food, or a chemical. Articles are not cosmetic products. So examples here, your cosmetic wipes. The tissue is the article, it's not the cosmetic, but the lotion impregnated in the tissue is a cosmetic product. Clothing with a releasing substance, the clothing material is not the cosmetic, but the substance that it's impregnated with is. For articles, the General Product Safety Directive, the GPSD in Europe, will apply. Tattoos are not cosmetics. Nutracosmetics are not cosmetics. Body paint is a cosmetic. So I'm giving you some examples here. It's not fully inclusive. And then leave-on hand sanitizer, which is the topic of the day, is not a cosmetic. And the reason why, the main purpose of it is to sanitize. So it's a biocidal product. Its main principal intended function is a biocidal product.
Belinda, sorry,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to check with you. Did you want to go through the whole presentation first before we address some questions? Or could we also address some of the questions as
Okay, do we want to stop here and just answer some of the questions? I don't mind, Audrey, so you can, yeah. I'm not looking at the Q&A, so maybe just stop me every now and again if it's building up and we can answer them.
Yeah, I think maybe an important question is from Adolf, where he's saying, I'm slightly confused about the contract and the practice under discussion. I already export to big and small buyers in EU without any of these processes under discussion.
So if I can answer that question, Adolf, you're exporting a raw material. You're not exporting a cosmetic product, a finished cosmetic product. If we go back, this presentation is covering cosmetic products, which are final cosmetic products, products that have incorporated the oils as raw materials. So we're not covering the raw material aspects at this stage, that is REACH and CLP. Yes, you can export an oil if you within the regulation, you can quite easily do that without, but what I'm talking about today is a final cosmetic product. I hope that answers the question.
If you say we will not be discussing it now, will it be later in the presentation?
I'm not covering REACH and CLP in these. CLP was, a webinar was presented by SIOPA.
Yeah.
And the REACH, we haven't done a webinar for REACH at all.
Good. We
can do a webinar for REACH if that's needed in the future. But that's, we've only presented 2 webinars, one on the technical data sheet and the product information sheet for raw material. And then I'll show you how that all ties in to the final cosmetic product. And today I'm only covering the regulation for the final cosmetic product.
Okay, thank you. I see.
That makes sense.
Adolf is just saying, yeah, I understood that it also covers raw materials. Point taken, then he believes then that he will excuse himself from the meeting.
Okay, no, that's no problem. It's important though, Adolf, to understand what's required for a cosmetic product in Europe, and the information that's required and why it's required, and that's what I'll be covering today. And hence the reason why I've gone through the definition to start with in terms of product, a cosmetic product. Okay. To continue with the definition of a final cosmetic product, if a product does not fall in both cosmetics and medicine, the Medicinal Products Directive of Europe will apply. So if it's making any medical claims, it will fall into Medicinal Products Directive only. It cannot have a dual function of being a cosmetic and a medicine. So the Medicinal Products Directive defines a medicinal product as any substance or combination of substances presented as having properties for treating or preventing disease in human beings. So if you make any claims or present a claim as such for preventing disease or treating disease, the product will no longer be a cosmetic product and it will fall squarely into the medicinal definition. The following considerations need to be taken into account when deciding which regulation the product falls under. What claims have you made? How the product appears to the public, the packaging and the labeling, and the wording on the packaging and labeling, and the promotional material that's provided, the advertisements that you provide, and the target market that you're targeting. So all that gets taken into account to decide whether your product is a medicine or whether it's a cosmetic in Europe, as an example. So continuing with the regulatory requirements, so we've now defined a cosmetic product and what that definition is in Europe. Under the regulation, if you have a cosmetic product that you launch in the European Union, you need to have a product information file, a PIF, for that product. The product information file must be developed prior to launching the product on the market. And the product information file is there to ensure that all supporting documentation is made available to support the assessment of a human risk assessment of the cosmetic product. So we need to see whether the cosmetic product is safe or not for human use prior to placing that product on the European market. And the safety is based on the foreseeable uses of that product. And the product information file is a living document where you need to keep it up to date at all times. So if you change any raw materials, if you change a supplier and the raw material is similar, if you update your stability tests, if you update your microbiological tests, if you update your GMP, you need to update your product information file. That's your final cosmetic product dossier, if I can use another word. And that this file needs to be kept up to date at all times. It is the responsible person in Europe's responsibility to ensure that the PIF is up to date at all times. This document must also be made available to the authorities within 48 hours. So if there is any complaints in the EU about the product, the authorities will follow up with the responsible person and will need to be able to access the product information file at the address of the responsible person within 48 hours. In order to conduct the safety assessment of the cosmetic product, you need a safety assessor. The safety assessor does not have to be resident in the European community, but needs to be suitably qualified as per EU regulation. It's defined in the regulation. The qualifications are defined as a person that possesses a university qualification in pharmacy, toxicology, medicine, or a similar discipline, and can also be defined by the member state itself. So for example, in France, they have their own additional regulations where the person that has a pharmaceutical degree or a medicine degree has to be a French qualification in order for the safety assessor to be legal in France. If the person has a toxicological qualification, there is no need for them to be French qualified, they can have a qualification outside of France. So you need to be quite aware of what the actual country in or the state in the EU may require in addition to the European regulation.
Belinda, there's
Yes.
2 questions from Nomi.
Okay.
She's asking, my products target sensitive skin. Is this still a cosmetic product? And then after that, she's also asking, if I change supplier from for the same oil, do I need to do the microbial and stability tests again?
Okay, so if your products are targeting sensitive skin, you need to have scientific evidence that proves that it has advantages for sensitive skin. So that would be the supporting document for your claims. We'll cover the claims requirements a little bit later in the presentation. So you must make sure that you have got scientific evidence that your final product is actually beneficial for sensitive skin. And you must not make any medicinal claims. So it really hangs on the way you word your product, and that you need to avoid any reference to treating a disease or preventing a disease. So that would be my advice on the sensitizing claim. And then if you change any of your raw materials, whether it's the same raw material but you're using a different supplier, you need to update your product information file, and your safety assessment needs to be done again by a safety assessor. You also, if you change your raw material, even if it's a change of supplier, you need to restart your stability tests. And if you do that, you need to update the product information file with the new stability information. Also from a microbiological point of view, this is for the final product, you need to make sure that the microbiological content is less than what's prescribed by the European Union, and that the product is subjected to what we call a challenge test, where it's challenged against certain microbes to make sure that when the product is exposed to these microbes, that they don't continue to grow in the product, and that, for instance, if you have a preservative in the product or there's a natural preservation activity in the product, that it keeps the microbial content below the safe levels required by the EU. I hope I've answered those questions.
Maybe just to mention, there was a similar question that was asked by Lebogang. Lebogang, I just want to confirm, I believe that this, did this answer your question as well?
Yes, it does answer my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we spoke of a responsible person. The responsible person, we need to define the responsible person's legal responsibilities, and it's defined as a legal or natural person within the EEC that is responsible to ensure compliance in accordance with the cosmetic regulation. So the responsible person has the whole responsibility of the cosmetic regulation in the EU. So who is the responsible person? So the default RP is the manufacturer in the European Union of the product. If you're outside of the EEC, then the importer becomes the default RP, okay? So the manufacturer may designate a person established within the EEC as the RP. So if you're outside of the European Union, you then, your importer becomes the default RP, but if you don't want to share your information with your importer, because you may have a number of importers, and you can't, and each importer will then have to be an RP for the region that they service, and they must have access to your product information file. The product information file contains all your IP, your intellectual property, your formulation, all your technical details, all your suppliers, and all of that. So if you want to protect your information, then you may appoint a designated independent RP in the European Union. As I mentioned, if the product is imported, each importer for the product is a designated RP. The importer, if you are a manufacturer outside of the European Union, like you would be in South Africa, your importer into the EU has to then designate in writing, if you choose to have an independent RP, each importer has to designate the responsibility to your chosen RP. A distributor is an RP, becomes an RP if he places a product under his name or trademark or modifies the product in any way prior to placing it on the market. So an example of that would be is he repacks the product. So he would be changing it. And he then becomes the default RP for that product in the European Union. Are there any questions around this? I don't think I see anything.
On the chat section.
I hope that makes sense. So if you're the manufacturer in the EU, you're the default RP. But if you're importing a product that's manufactured outside of the European Union, the importer themselves become the designated RP. But the manufacturer in the EU or the importer in the EU can designate their responsibility to an independent RP. Okay, the RP's legal obligations include ensuring that the product is safe for the intended foreseeable use. So the use that you advertise on your label, on your marketing material. So the product must be safe for that use. The RP must ensure the product is manufactured according to good manufacturing principles, GMP. So if you have an importer in the EU, he needs to confirm that you are working according to GMP. And that's not just issuing a statement that you work according to GMP. The RP has to audit the GMP facility in South Africa or wherever the product is being manufactured outside of the European Union to make sure that the GMP declaration is actually what it is. So it's quite a big responsibility in terms of the GMP. The RP's responsibility is also to ensure that the cosmetic product has undergone a safety assessment prior to being placed on the European market. This is a key point. And if you change anything in the product, the safety assessment needs to be redone prior to that batch being placed on the European market. And you need to be able to prove that with a new safety assessment and an updated product information file. The responsible person has to keep each version of the product information file for at least a period of 10 years following the date of the last batch of that product. So if you change your raw material, or if you change anything, packaging, any element of the product, you need to update the PIF, and your 10 years starts, the clock for the 10 years starts again from the new batch, which contains that new raw material, or new packaging, or new stability, prior to placing that product on the market. To continue, the RP has quite a lot of legal responsibilities. I've just I've summarized them very briefly in this presentation. But as I mentioned right in the beginning, the RP has the legal responsibility for the entire cosmetic regulation for each product that is placed on the European market. So the RP needs to ensure that all analyses of a cosmetic product, if there's any analyses that are performed, are done within the guidelines of GLP. It does not have to be an accredited lab for that specific analysis that was conducted for that cosmetic product. But the laboratory needs to be working according to good laboratory practice. And the tests that were conducted on the cosmetic product need to use appropriate reference standards as published in, apologies for the spelling mistake, the official journal of the European Union. And I've given you a screenshot of the actual guidelines or provisions provided by the European Commission under the GLP practice requirement. The RP needs to submit information electronically to the Commission. This is prior to placing the product on the market, and this is done through the Cosmetic Notification Portal. So if you update your PIF, again, you need to update your registration on the portal, and I'll cover that at the end of the presentation. To continue the RP's legal obligations, and the reason why I'm going through this, it also covers the aspects that are required for a cosmetic product in Europe. Is to ensure that the control of prohibited and restricted substances as listed in the annexes of the regulation are controlled. So the RP needs to ensure that there's no prohibited substances in the cosmetic product. And if there are restricted substances, they are within the limits prescribed by the annexes in the cosmetic regulation. So there's prohibited substances annexes, there's restricted substances, Annex 3, there's Annex 4, which is your colorants, Annex 5, which is your preservatives, and Annex 6 covers your UV filter requirements. The RP also needs to be aware of any carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reproductive substances within the requirements of the regulation. The RP needs to notify the Commission of the use of any nanomaterials that do not conform in terms of Annex 3, 6 months prior to placing the product on the market. This is nanomaterials is quite a detailed technical requirement. So it's not all nanomaterials. If the nanomaterial is listed in Annex 3, then there's no need for this. But if the nanomaterial is not listed in Annex 3, then information needs to be submitted to the European Commission 6 months prior to placing the product on the market to assess the technical safety of that nanomaterial that proposed nanomaterial in the product. The RP also has to define traces of prohibited substances based on being technically unavoidable within good manufacturing process. So an example of this would be pesticides in your oils or heavy metals in your oils. They need to conform with the restricted substances within Annex 3 and scientifically proven safe levels based on the actual use of that oil in a cosmetic product. Additional obligations: ensure the final cosmetic product has not been tested on animals. I'll cover this in detail in a section to come. And then ensure that the label conforms with the regulation. So this is the RP's responsibility, to ensure that the label conforms. To ensure that the product claims, and yeah, we're talking, we had the question about sensitive skin. If you make that claim, you need to be able to support it. The claims must be substantiated and evidence must be provided in the product information file. Access to information by the public as required by the regulation, the RP provides that service. So if the public requires additional information on the product, the RP is obliged to provide that information. Obviously within limits. I mean, your exact formulation is not an obligation to provide to the public. The RP must also conduct ongoing market surveillance. So if there's any serious undesirable effects reported, the RP must keep the product information file updated with those reports. The RP must notify the authorities in the event of these serious undesirable effects. So typically in Europe, you would be notified by a doctor or a hospital that a patient has been seen by the medical professional, and that the product, in their opinion, has caused a serious undesirable effect. And this then needs to be updated in the product information file, and the responsible person has to notify the authorities in terms of this. The RP needs to provide authorities as and when requested on the presence of particular substances in the product. This is when regulations are updated, or for instance, France updates a notification regulation. The RP needs to be aware of all of this within the European Union. And then, as mentioned before, the RP needs to continuously update the product information file if any changes necessitated. For instance, a raw material supplier change, a change in formula, or an updated stability, as we've mentioned. Okay, so going on to labeling of a cosmetic product. So what is required, the basic requirements for label in the European Union for cosmetic final product? The name or registered name and address of the RP, where the PIF can be readily accessible, to be underlined. So you can have several addresses on your label, but you need to underline the RP address. The country of origin for imported cosmetics must be mentioned on the label. The regulated languages of the member state in which the product is made available to the end user. So each member state has a regulated language or languages. So in France, it's French and English. The label needs to be in both languages. You need to show the nominal content of that product, either given in weight or volume. The net contents of a product must be labeled. So that is the net quantity of the product at the time of packaging. It's not required for anything less than 5 grams or 5 mils. For single-use packs such as sachets or capsules or free samples, if products are sold as a collection of items, this should be stated. Example, 10 sachets. Just to note at this point, often we get the question, do marketing samples fall within the cosmetic regulation? And yes, they do. A marketing sample is supplied to the market and as marketing or advertising units, and that is expected to be used by the end user. So we need to know that that marketing unit is safe for the end user to be using. So the full cosmetic regulation applies to marketing samples. If you're using the e-mark, it must be shown on the product, and that is, you only use the e-mark if you are filling in accordance with the average fill system, which is defined in the weights and measures legislation of 1976. So you only use the e-mark if you are following the average fill system legislation. Particular precautions for consumers to take note of must be advised on the labeling. The batch number or reference number to identify the cosmetic, which must also be referred to in the product information file. And the function of the cosmetic product is extremely important, because this defines whether it is actually a cosmetic product or whether it falls within another regulation. For example, a medicinal product or a biocidal product, like your hand sanitizer, because you're using the word sanitizer. The biocidal regulation would then also apply. The labeling of a cosmetic product continues.
Sorry, there was a question from Nomi, but I see she retracted it now. I just want to check with her if a question was answered.
Yes. I did
No,
send her a note. Sorry, it's Letitia.
Oh,
Belinda
okay.
is going to cover it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Continue the list of ingredients. So that's why we are so so insistent on understanding what the chemical components of the oils are, because these ingredients at chemical level have to be listed on the label as per the regulatory requirements. So and that needs to be identified when we do the safety assessment. If we don't understand the full list of ingredients, we're not disclosing all of the ingredients. So we're not in compliance with the regulation. If an INCI name is not available, which is sometimes the case for some of our indigenous oils, a common nomenclature name can be used. Once an INCI name becomes available, the label must be updated within 12 months of the date of the INCI name being available. If your packaging is very small, the information can be enclosed on a leaflet or a label tape or tag or cord. So you need to be able to display all your information on a single label. If you can't, you need to provide a leaflet. Products such as soap bath balls, for instance, that are sold separately, or other small products where a Z label stroke leaflet is not possible, a notice has to appear in immediate proximity to that container or that product. Where it's or at the point of sale. Products packaged at the point of sale refer to each member state for labeling requirements. So there's each member state also has additional additional regulations for products that are packaged at point of sale. The language is prescribed by each member state and needs to be complied with on the label. And the specific warnings to prevent misuse of the product need to be on the label. And then note, the cosmetic product and packaging should not mimic a foodstuff. It should also not mimic a toy. So you can refer to the regulation 87-357 from a foodstuff point of view. The label must also either contain the date of minimum durability or the date after opening in terms of its stability. So minimum durability is if you have a stability test that is less than 30 months, and it has to be a stability test at room temperature. So if you've got accelerated stability tests, or your room temperature stability test is less than 30 months, you will be using the minimum durability sign. If you've conducted a stability test at room temperature for more than 30 months, you are then allowed to use the date after opening symbol on your cosmetic product. Okay, so we've covered some of the legal requirements so that we can really tie the ends together in terms of why do we need all the information we ask for. And in this section, I'm going to be covering what is required in a product information file. And remembering that the upkeep and the generation of the product information file and the safety of the cosmetic, the safety assessment, is all the legal responsibility of the RP. So the RP is going to be asking for information on the cosmetic product in order to ensure that the safety assessment is done correctly. The product information file needs to contain the following information. It needs to have the description of the cosmetic product. It needs to contain the cosmetic product safety report, which is what we call part, which is split into two parts, part A and part B. It needs to contain the description and method of the manufacture and the GMP compliance. It needs to have proof of all the claims and effects that you're claiming for your product. And you need data on animal testing for both your raw materials and your final cosmetic product. The description of the product. The description of the product is defined by CALIPA and the Scientific Council Notes of Guidance, 10th revision, within the following categories. So the safety assessment is conducted within these categories. The GMP is your good manufacturing practice, and you need to be following the ISO standard 22716. In South Africa, it's a SANS code 22716. You don't necessarily have to be accredited for under the ISO standard, but you need to follow and practice good manufacturing for the manufacturing of the product. The GMP covers various areas in terms of personnel, your premises, your equipment, your raw materials and your packaging, and all the information required for that. Your actual production process and how that's conducted, your finished products and the quality control laboratory that you're using, treatment of the product that is out of specification, your waste management procedures. If you subcontract any part of your manufacturing, that needs to be done within the realms of GMP. So there's a lot to be covered in GMP. And as part of our deliverable in this project, we have also provided for a GMP knowledge product, which will be available through the GIZ and the requirements for GMP. So if you don't work according to GMP or you're not accredited according to GMP, you cannot place a cosmetic final product onto the European market. And that GMP needs to be, that GMP claim, if you're not accredited, needs to be audited by your responsible person in the EU. Okay, the next section we're going to cover is proof of claims. So a claim, if you want to make a claim in the EU, it needs to be legally compliant, it needs to be truthful, It needs to be appropriate. It needs to have appropriate supporting evidence. It cannot denigrate or opposition ingredients. It must be clearly understood, and it must, and tests must be conducted on ethical guidelines. So in detail, legal compliance is assumed that it's assumed that that the product complies with the cosmetic regulation and may not be stated. So you can't say, for instance, does not contain hydroquinone, which is banned in the EU. It's assumed that the product does not contain that because that is a legal requirement. You need to be truthful. Claims cannot be made falsely. Example, if it contains a specific product ingredient, then it should actually contain that ingredient. You can't specify on the label that it contains that ingredient and then it doesn't. Claims on ingredients, and this is an important issue I wanted to bring up, is claims on ingredients cannot be translated. So if you have if an indigenous oil has been shown to have specific properties, for instance, it's moisturizing, it cannot be translated. That claim cannot be translated to a product unless that claim has been proven scientifically on the final product and not just on the oil. So that is an important point that we need to highlight. Because you cannot just transfer or translate that claim across to the final product. It must be proven, scientifically proven on the final product. Claims should be supported by appropriate supporting evidence. Claims cannot denigrate opposition and ingredients that may be legally included in a cosmetic. Example, this product does not contain parabens. Parabens are legal in the EU. The use of parabens are legal. So you cannot say on your product does not contain parabens because that's regarded as denigration of an ingredient and possibly opposition that are using parabens. Claims should be clearly understood by the end user. There should be no confusion when it comes to a claim. And tests should be conducted on human volunteers following ethical guidelines. And products tested should have a safety assessment prior to human trials. So if you want to test your final cosmetic product on human volunteers, it needs to have been assessed by a safety assessor and assessed to be safe in terms of the foreseeable use prior to human trials. I've provided a technical guidance document on cosmetic claims produced by the EU sub-working group. So the link is there for you to go and have a look at. There's a lot more detail in the technical guidance document provided by the European Union. Okay, data on animal testing. What is the requirement there? So animal testing is prohibited for cosmetic products and ingredients where animal testing was conducted to meet regulatory requirements for cosmetics. There are deadlines in terms of this. An animal testing ban on finished products applies from the 11th of September 2004. Animal testing on ingredients or a combination of ingredients applies from 11 March 2009. New ingredients developed for use in a cosmetic product needs to be derived from non-animal alternative methods. These are prescribed. These approved methods are published by the OECD, and there are guidelines published by the scientific committee in the EU. The EU reports annually on our alternative methods, the development and their validation. So you need to be using a validated OECD test method. Pre-existing data prior to the deadline for an existing cosmetic ingredient can still be used. Animal tests relating to chemical substances developed for uses other than cosmetics, example for food, for medicine, for biocides, can be used as supporting data of an ingredient intended to be used for cosmetic. Okay, now we're going to move on to the cosmetic product safety report. What is, and the information, the detailed information that we need to conduct a safety assessment. So in part A, we need to provide the composition of the cosmetic product. The composition is down to chemical level, to CAS number level. So we need to understand exactly the chemicals that are in each raw material to then translate that to the concentration in the final product. We need to understand the physical and chemical characteristics of each raw material and the chemicals associated with that raw material, the stability of the final cosmetic product, as well as the stability of the raw materials. For instance, your seed oils or your essential oils need to be stable and need to have a shelf life provided by the raw material supplier. Because if they're not, for instance, oxidatively stable, then the raw material, the seed oil, for instance, is possibly not safe for application on humans. The microbiological quality of both the raw materials and the final product, we need information on that. We need to understand all the possible impurities of the raw materials. These could be naturally derived raw materials, such as heavy metals from the soils, or other chemicals used in fertilizers. It could be pesticides. Your supplier may not be using pesticides, but the surrounding farms could be using pesticides, and there could be impurities in that. There could be other programs that are using pesticides, for instance, malarial programs, where communities could be collecting raw materials, for instance, baobabs, and there could have been a DDT spray close by. So we need to ensure that the impurities are within safe use limits. And most often these impurities are actually carcinogens or mutagens. They can be present because they're technically unavoidable, but they must be within safe limits, and those need to be calculated accordingly. The packaging material information, I need to make an important point here. The packaging material must be food grade, and every single component of that packaging material should be food grade. If it's not food grade, you need to provide leach tests for that packaging material so that we can assess what is leaching from the packaging material and whether it still remains safe, because a lot of leaching can be attributed to packaging material that is not safe, and it can cause your product to end up being not safe for use. What is the actual use? Is it a face cream? Is it a body lotion? Is it a shampoo? Is it a hair conditioner? What is the actual use, foreseeable use of the product? And then from that, we look at the potential exposure scenarios. So if it's a spray, a deodorant, the exposure to the deodorant is not only dermal, it's also inhalation. So that needs to be assessed. The toxicological profile of each substance that contributes to the final composition of the cosmetic product needs to be understood. And if there is potentially any undesirable effects, they need to be highlighted, and any other information on claims, scientific tests that have been conducted on the final product using alternative test methods, these need to be provided. So we need to collect data for part A so that we can conduct part B. Okay, so I just wanted to show you some examples of information sources, good information sources where we can get this information, and product specification sheets, technical data sheets, a safety data sheet, a regulatory information specific to a raw material that we've found to be really good examples of raw materials. So I'm just going to go into, so this supplier is Savannah. They've provided, you can see in their product information sheet, they've provided information about the manufacturing, all the product information and the ingredients, the compositional information, safety and regulatory compliance. They've provided storage, packaging, and preparation information. So you can see it's really comprehensive, and we wouldn't have to ask for any additional information in this area. You can see, for instance, in their checklist, they have allergen statements, whether the product is
Sorry,
melamine free.
Belinda.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't see the specification sheet.
Can't you?
We just only see the presentation for now.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, we're not going to, we'll have to give that a skip because I'm not sure why that's not showing. Just tell me if you can see this. Maybe I can escape. Can you see this?
Can just see a presentation minimized now.
Okay, so you can't see the, okay, that's fine.
No.
We'll provide we'll provide some good examples as part of the presentation. Unfortunately. So some very good tox sources from ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, and also ToxSource PubChem, which is the US open source information or data set that the US keep updated. Okay, so we're going to look at the safety assessment and the requirements for the safety assessment. The safety assessor conducts a safety assessment based on the relevant toxicological and exposure data, which was obtained in this section in accordance with the regulations and guidelines. A hazard is not necessarily a risk. The definition of a hazard is, so for instance, if an oil is sensitizing, it doesn't mean to say that it's potentially a risk when it's included in a product. We need to, so a hazard is the potential to cause harm based on the properties of that chemical, whereas a risk is the probability to cause that harm relating to exposure. So we need to then look at how long is the subject exposed to the chemical and at what concentration or amount to determine the risk. So hazard does not necessarily translate into risk. What do we need to know in order to conduct this risk assessment on a chemical component? A complete chemical profile of the chemicals in the raw material. So we need to understand exactly what the raw material contains. If you don't understand that, you don't have confidence in terms of your raw material and the information. And you need to understand the possible contaminants. Why do we need confidence in the analysis or the information that we need for a chemical? So the analytical profile of an oil has been done by a laboratory that works according to GLP. That gives us confidence. A chemical must be extracted or manufactured and stored in accordance with GMP. All the possible components have been identified, including the contaminants. And the oil stability has been proven. So that's within the actual packaging and the packaging compatibility, the microbiology of the oil, and oxidative stability throughout the process. Is it safe for human consumption? You need to consider all the routes of exposure. Is the subject exposed orally or dermally or through inhalation? What are the physical and chemical nature of each component? Is it an organic or inorganic compound? This is important when we look at additional information, when we're needing to justify a safe level of use. The water solubility of that product, the size of that particle. The size of a particle changes the toxicological profile of that particle. And then the absorption rate of that chemical, dermally, orally, and through inhalation. We also need to understand the toxicokinetics and the toxicodynamics, the mechanisms in the human body in terms of each chemical component and how they are absorbed in the human body, how they're distributed within the human body, how they're metabolized, and how they're eventually eliminated. This all has to be taken into account when we look at a safety assessment. The tox profile, once we understand the exposure routes, we need to understand the tox profile. So we need to understand what is the acute toxicity of a chemical within a raw material or an oil, a component within that oil. So what is the LD50? What is the chronic toxicity? This could be subacute, where tests have been done over 28 days. It could be subchronic, which is 90 days. And chronic is over 85% of the life of the test animal that this was conducted on. Is it, or in terms of the alternative test method defined to determine 85% of the equivalence of 85% of the life? Is the chemical a carcinogen? Is the chemical a mutagen? Or does the chemical have specific target organ toxicities? For instance, ethanol is a liver target organ toxin. Is the chemical a sensitizer? Is it a skin or an eye irritant? Does it induce phototoxicity? And we also need to we need to understand what the point of departure is. What do we believe is a proven safe use level? Then from that, once we have all the information put together, we then need to determine what is the safe dose level of each component. And further questions have to be asked. We need to know if it's a leave on or rinse off. This gives you exposure, your duration of contact. You need to know how much is applied per day, the frequency per day. So the SCCS provides standard under the cosmetic use tables, the standard amount to be used per day for a shampoo, for instance, and the frequency that it is used. The concentration of the component in the product, what is the concentration? So that's why we need all the data from all the raw materials and all and to understand the chemical components of that raw material, to understand the concentration of the component in the product. The exposure route needs to be understood. I've mentioned that. And then we need to understand who will be using this. Will it be the elderly? Will it be the immunocompromised in terms of the state of health? Will it be a baby or will it be a toddler? So we need to understand the stage of life and the state of health. If we don't assess it for children, the product is not suitable for children, and the label actually has to state that. If there's any potential health concerns, if it's used by an immunocompromised person or an elderly person, that needs to be stated on the label. We need to understand the absorption rates of the components of the cosmetic and if there's any other contaminants. So understanding the components of each raw material, we take it down to chemical level, CAS number, INCI name. What is the concentration range? Maximum concentration range is used for that. So the worst case scenario is used for the tox assessment. In this table, you can see we have some of the ingredients. I haven't included all of them, which can be found in a baobab oil. And this would be the maximum concentration percentage listed here. So you can see there's quite a number of components in baobab oil, and each of these components need to be assessed for their safe use levels in a particular final cosmetic product. So how do we and I've just really put a very simple example here just to try and illustrate, how do we calculate the safe use level of a chemical component? So we'll take arachidic acid here, it's in at 0.805% in baobab oil, and we will then conduct a safe use level. So it's sitting at 0.81% or 0.805% in the product. In this product, Calipa or the SCCS have given an amount per day of 8 grams. We normally assess it on a body weight of 60 kilograms. That's a standard in Europe. And then we need to understand what the no observable adverse effect limit is of arachidic acid. We then calculate based on retention. This is a rinse off. So the retention factor is 0.01. And the default dermal absorption, so if we do not know what the dermal absorption of arachidic acid is, there's a default dermal absorption that is used, and then we then calculate how much of this component will be available systemically. So once you've placed it on your skin, it gets absorbed through your skin and your epidermis and becomes systemically available within the human body. And this is the amount calculated that would be systemically safe versus the amount that is determined safe scientifically, the no observed adverse effect limit. So that would be 370 milligrams per kilogram body weight per day. We've determined what would be available in this product per day. So our margin of safety is 68,000. So it's 68,000 times less than the lowest safe level determined. We use a safety factor of 100. That's why it must be greater than 100. This number must be greater than 100. So that's really how we would calculate the safe use level for each and every one of those components. So if we are missing a component, we're missing the toxicological safety assessment of that component, and it could potentially cause harm to the end user. If we don't have tox data available for a substance, we try to determine this. Well, we know what the structure is of a chemical, but we then try to relate it to other chemicals that have a similar structure. And we look at those chemicals and the nature of those chemicals. And we classify them in terms of what we call Kramer classes. So there's 4 Kramer classes. There's the carcinogenic class, which is the worst case scenario class. And then there's Kramer 1, 2, and 3 classes. So yeah, I've used the Kramer class as a carcinogen. So we don't know, we don't have any tox data on a component, but we relate it to a similar chemical from a structural point of view. And that chemical that we related it to is a carcinogen. So we assess it under the carcinogen risk. And there's a paper that was written by Cruz et al. In 2004. that is used as a reference standard for what we call the toxicity threshold calculation when you don't have tox data and you've used a structural relevant analogy. Hello? Hello? Can okay, no questions. Okay, so again, we use the body weights of 60 kilograms. We've used the amount prescribed by the SCC in the notes of guidance for cosmetics. The same retention factor, the dermal absorption, what we've used for this component in the same raw material. And then we determine the safe use concentration or threshold for that component. And we know that it's at this level that that component is deemed safe. If that component is in a higher concentration in the cosmetic product, then we can't say that the cosmetic product would be safe for that particular application. So I just wanted to show how we actually tackle each and every component and the toxicological safe use level for those components. And then to finish off finally, I know it's been long and very tedious and a lot of technical information, but please feel free to contact us for any further information. My final slide is how to register the cosmetic product on the notification portal. So once you've determined that your product is safe and you have your product information file in place and you've appointed your responsible person or you have your importer as your default responsible person and they have your product information file, it's the responsible person's responsibility, as mentioned before, to notify the cosmetic product on the cosmetic product notification portal prior to placing the product on the European market. It's a free online notification system, but you have to have a European address because the RP has to be domiciled in the European Union. It is the responsibility of the EU responsible person to register the product. And the European Commission website provides a tutorial on how to do this. So we've provided that, web link for you and just the steps that are involved in actually creating and notifying the product on the portal. Okay, I'm at the end of the presentation, so yeah, happy to ask any questions, answer any questions, and yeah, the presentation will be provided by the GIZ. The GIZ will provide a link or send out the presentations, so that request needs to be made through the GIZ. Are there any further questions?
Maybe just to make a comment, Belinda, the links will be shared with all the participants that were registered. So yeah, we'll share an email with everyone that's got the links to all the documentation, guiding documents, etc. for today and yesterday.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions?
I don't see any questions in the Q&A and there's no raised hands, but everyone has the ability to unmute themselves. So, oh, okay, there's a lot of questions in the chat now. Now it's just Louise, did you have a question? I think you unmuted yourself. Was it just a mistake maybe? No.
Anybody else? Hopefully it makes sense of a very complex subject, regulatory subject. Okay, I think if there's no further questions, we're just going to sign off then and say, yeah, thank you very, very much for attending. It's much appreciated, and I hope that it was informative enough to be able to tie the loose ends together in terms of why do we need the amount and the detail of information we need, and what do we need to assess a final cosmetic product safe. This is the information, the basic information that your customers in Europe that would be formulating with your raw materials would ask for. Or if you're making a cosmetic in South Africa, you need to comply with this basic information that we've presented today. So hopefully that makes your lives a bit easier, and it clears up a lot of questions you may have had. Okay, thanks everybody.
And also thank you to Belinda and Letitia for the presentation today and yesterday. We really appreciate it, and really good work done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye, Karen.